Patty Dye.
Well, hi, David Robinson.
I want you to talk a little bit about. There's a concept that we really love and use in a lot of our work, and it's this concept of simple, complicated, and complex problems.
Okay, so just talk a little bit about it.
Yeah.
We were really enamored, and still are, of a book called, what is it? Getting to Maybe?
Getting to Maybe.
Getting to Maybe. And in it, the authors talk about the distinction between simple, complicated, and complex problems, which really rang true to the two of us in a lot of ways. Let me just talk briefly about what each of those is, and then give a couple of examples and throw some out to yourself, David. But simple problem is something that we face every day. It's pretty simple to solve, and you would use the word solve. I think that would be the verb. So baking a cake, if I have the right ingredients and I have the apron and the oven and the recipe, then I can pretty much bake a cake. I think most of us could do that. So that's a simple problem. And we face simple problems in business and life every day, and we just take care of them. The second kind of problem is a complicated problem. A complicated problem is more complicated. It has more moving parts. So moon launch might be a complicated problem where I have to bring in more expertise. I have to have more Excel spreadsheets because we love Excel spreadsheets. I have to know more math. There are a lot of moving parts, but it's doable. I mean, have to have 200 pages of a plan, but it's doable. I can move logically from one place to the next. I can actually solve the complicated problem.
Right.
And the third kind of problem is a complex problem. A complex problem is raising a child. A complex problem is finding more meaning in your life. A complex problem is diversity in organizations. Anytime that you're dealing with human beings, that's a complexity. And yet we approach complexities as if they were merely complicated. So if I just have another strategic plan about how I'm going to, find meaning in my life, then I'll be able to find it. A complexity is something that you walk toward and into, but it's not something that you solve. And so to approach it as if it's merely complicated is actually to not only not solve it, in the traditional way, but to make it worse and to disallow for the fact that it was a complexity to begin with. So a lot of the work that we're doing is around this idea of complexity. We're not approaching the work we're doing in education, for example, as if it's a complicated problem, that if we just have another plan in place, it will solve it. We're really looking at it as a complexity. What else would you add to that?
Well, I would say I love that because I think that all the work that we're doing now in the world is really walking into complexities. And really the sort of common theme, whether we're working in education or in business or with individuals, is to help people recognize that what they're dealing with is a complexity and not something that's merely complicated. Because I think we default to the idea that we can control it and that we can contain it, and that is to treat a complexity as if it were merely complicated. And that gets us in all kinds of problems.
Right. Yeah. The story that I talk about a lot is the noose story. Yeah. And I think that's a great example of getting called to do some work in an organization where white employees were putting nooses on black employees' lockers. It was a manufacturing environment. And saying to them, I'd be glad to help because I've done a lot of work around racism. What did you have in mind? And the answer blew me away because the answer was, well, we were thinking a 1 or a 2 hour training session.
Right.
And that is to address the complexity as if it's merely complicated and not only doesn't solve it, but makes it worse. So a lot of the work then is really focused on the complexity. And what that means if you're working with us, I think, is that there's a need to understand that there's not a solution, that we're not operating at that kind of superficial level, but we're going beneath that to a different story.
Right. Thanks, Patty Dye.
Thank you, David Robinson.